Cyrodiil, the seat of the Empire, the land where the Emperor makes his decrees and enforces his will. But the Emperor of Tamriel is not the only ruler in Cyrodiil, as there are cities beyond the great Imperial City from Anvil to Leyawiin that need direction, that need a leader. While some provinces like Skyrim have Jarls and others like High Rock have kings, Cyrodiil instead has counts, who have limited authority but are largely independent and are free to control the city guard and regulate trade, among other things. But this begs the question, out of all the counts that exist in Cyrodiil during the events of Oblivion, who is the best and most respectable ruler in Oblivion Remastered? Hello my fellow hirelings of House Telvanni, I'm Neloth, and today we are going to be ranking each of the counts in Oblivion Remastered. Before we begin, let me state, as always, that this is simply my opinion, and if you actually like a count that I think is more worthless than Nazim, that is completely okay. We are all entitled to our own opinions, even if yours is wrong, but feel free to comment down your incorrect opinions, and I may even read them. So with all that being said, let us count the counts. Coming in dead last is Count Regulus Terentius. Count Terentius is the Count of Bravil, one of the worst cities in the game, as it is nothing more than a shantytown filled with skooma addicts, so he's already off to a terrible start. And if that isn't bad enough, he is also incredibly arrogant, thinking himself better than everyone else, even though not a single person likes or respects him, and he rules the worst city in Cyrodiil. The Count doesn't even bother to actually rule his sorry excuse for a city either, and delegates most of the work to his steward, Dro Narahe, all while he focuses on his quote-unquote pastimes, whatever those are. Even on the rare occasions he does do his job as a leader, he is quite incompetent, which leads to people taking advantage of him. For example, in the Nibonese region of Cyrodiil, a Khajiiti criminal gang known as the Renrija Kryn were apparently known to operate in that area and make trouble. But it seems that this gang does not really trouble the city of Bravil, as the Count hired a Dunmer named Drell's Theron as a special inquisitor to take care of them. But Drell's Theron lives a very relaxing life as he wears fine clothes, dines with the Count, and oh yeah, never even leaves Castle Bravil! So much for a special inquisitor silencing the Renrija Kryn. Either there are no Renrija Kryn and Drell's is lying, or there are and the Count's special inquisitor does nothing about it. Either way, he made a poor ruling and is being taken advantage of. It is also known by literally everyone that Count Terentius' son, Gellius, is a major skooma addict, which does not look good for the Count, showing he's not just a poor leader, but probably a neglectful father as well, since there is no evidence suggesting he even knows or even cares about his son's habits. The interesting part is that Count Terentius was not always a worthless individual. In his younger days, he rose to the rank of champion in the Imperial City Arena and was able to use his wealth and notability to become the Count. At first, he was regarded by the common folk of Bravil as a great and kind man, but as time went on, Regulus Terentius became corrupted by idleness and power, and devolved into a spoiled brat. Fun fact, but Count Terentius is never marked as essential, meaning you are free to kill him whenever you please, just a bit of advice. Drinking into 7th place is Ormellius Goldwine. Count Ormellius Goldwine rules the city of Kvatch. Oh, and he is also fucking dead. Sadly, Ormellius Goldwine was killed by an overwhelming force of Daedra when a great gate opened into Kvatch. Because he was killed and there is no way to save him in the game, I can only reasonably rank him in 7th place, which should tell you something about fucking Regulus. We don't know that much about Count Goldwine, except that in the Pocket Guide to the Empire, it says his sons and heirs were killed after a violent dispute over an inheritance. But hey, at least they weren't killed by Daedra. What I do find interesting is the Count's last name, Goldwine, which is a name that does not sound like a typical imperial name, and yes, Ormellius is labeled as an imperial. Goldwine sounds very Nordic to me, which is why I theorize that the Count was actually half imperial and half Nord. Which would make sense, as babies of parents that are not of the same race, in the Elder Scrolls, typically take after the mother's race while inheriting some traits of the father. Meaning he is imperial, but his mother took the name Goldwine when she married. Although this theory matters very little since he is dead. Rest in peace, Goldwine. May you drink a never-ending amount of wine from golden chalices. Trading into 6th place is Count Andel Indarys. Count Andel Indarys rules the city of Cyrodiil and is the only non-imperial count in the game. He was originally from Morrowind and worked as a trader within the Great House Hlaalu, but immigrated to Cyrodiil to find better opportunity. And it seems he found his opportunity as he was able to gather enough influence to be named the goddamn Count. Though it is heavily believed that the Queen Mother Baronziah and her son King Hlaalu Helseth were really the ones that put Andel on the throne. Which makes sense given his personality, as he is not the best ruler and seems to be very absent-minded when it comes to the affairs of his city. For example, the Count's captain of the guard, Ulrich Leland, is actually incredibly corrupt, as Leland terrorizes the citizenry of Cyrodiil by imposing incredibly high fines for the smallest infractions, even making up crimes just as an excuse to impose more fines. And Ulrich will take those fines for himself and purchase whatever he wants so that he can live a life of luxury, all while Count Indarys either has no idea what's happening or simply doesn't care. Though when presented with enough evidence, Count Indarys will fire and imprison Ulrich. There's also the fact that the Count very likely knows that the Dark Brotherhood operates inside of his city, and he does nothing about it due to a combination of bribes and threats. Additionally, many rumors circulate about how the Count struggles with debauchery and infidelity, which has led to big rumors surrounding the death of the Count's wife, Lathisa, and how he orchestrated her demise, though there is very little evidence to prove it. Andel Indarys also has a son named Farwyll who heads an order of knights called the Knights of the Thorn. This may sound prestigious, however, this order is simply a social club made up of rich kid braggarts that do nothing but annoy the guards. Farwyll did attempt to close an Oblivion gate with his knights, but he simply rushed in with no plan and got the majority of his comrades killed, showing that Farwyll is just as absent-minded as his father. Count Andel Indarys isn't a horrible leader. When he isn't full of himself, he can be quite polite. But it is very clear he is not the best ruler in Cyrodiil and is simply a figurehead installed by House Hlaalu to further their own interests. And the only thing worse than House Hlaalu is House Dres. Marrying into 5th place is Count Marius Caro. Count Marius Caro is the ruler of the city Leyawiin and rules alongside his newlywed wife Alicia. Not Saint Alicia, who brought forth the first Tamrielic Empire, but rather this Alicia, whose mother is actually the Count of Coral, a woman we will talk about soon. Marius used to be a good ruler that came from a long line of Counts of Leyawiin and was beloved by his people. However, when he married his wife, his views began to change and were manipulated by his new wife. See, Leyawiin is a city with a mix of Imperial, Khajiit, and Argonian cultures, and has always been that way. But Alicia, used to Imperial life in Coral, had a distaste for non-Imperial culture and manipulated Marius to enforce an Imperial-dominated culture in Leyawiin, all while suppressing the culture of others. What's worse is that the Count and his wife have a torture chamber installed underneath Castle Leyawiin, where they bring in and torture Argonian immigrants from Black Marsh, which I feel is done for sick pleasure rather than information, as I have no idea what Argonian immigrants would even give up information on. And Blackmarsh is a province of the Empire, so they should be allies and friendly. Beyond his wife, Marius also has a very independent view and despises how Chancellor Akato tries to help out the other provinces rather than Cyrodiil. Even though, during and after the Oblivion crisis, Cyrodiil is far better off than other provinces like Morrowind and the Somerset Isles, provinces that were absolutely decimated. Even then, Marius has such a stupid take because the Empire needs to look after its territories, because if they don't, they will lose them over time and lose their imperial power. Now, this isn't to say that Marius is all bad, as he can be a competent ruler. For example, unlike Regulus, Marius is actually competent when it comes to handling the Renresia Kryn and other bandits by establishing an order of knights called the Knights of the White Stallion. An order that is comprised of 2 individuals who have proven themselves after defeating the Black Bow Bandits, Mazoga the Orc and you, the player. Marius used to be a good ruler, however his wife's influence has turned him into a worse one that is ignorant to other people's own cultures, and even tortures Argonian immigrants for no fucking reason. He's bad, but he is better than a Halalu figurehead and fucking Regulus. Oh, and while Marius is always essential, his wife stops being essential after you complete a certain Thieves Guild quest. Do with that information as you will. Hammering her way into 4th place is Countess Millona Umbranox. Countess Millona Umbranox is the ruler of the city Anvil, and rules alone after her husband disappeared one day and never came back. Millona seems to be a decent ruler as everyone likes her, and she is also very polite as she greets her fellow citizens when walking the streets instead of staying in the castle like some other counts. However, the reason she is in 4th place is simply because there is very little information on her aside from the fate of her husband, who I will talk about in a second. And the reason why is solely because her entire existence in the game is centered around her husband, who was once the Count, but then became a thief, and then the Grey Fox. But being the Grey Fox means donning the cowl of Nocturnal, and there's a curse on the cowl, so the Count's name was stricken from existence. At least until he steals an Elder Scroll and uses it to rewrite fate so that his name can be known. His name is Corvus, by the way, and so he can get back with his wife. I'll speak more on Corvus later, but Millona seems to be a decent ruler. It's just unfortunate we don't have much information on her besides disliking crime. Fun fact, but Millona is only essential until after the Thieves Guild questline is complete, meaning if you desire to, you can kill her for some sick reason. Portraying herself in 3rd place is Arriana Valga. Countess Arriana Valga is the ruler of the city of Coral, mother of Marius Caro, and widow to the late Count Marius Valga. Before Arriana became the Countess, her husband Carus was killed in a battle against a clansman of Nords. The death of Arriana's husband greatly affected her, beyond just inheriting a powerful position, as she spends many nights looking at and even speaking to a portrait of her husband in her bedroom. While Arriana is grief-stricken, she does appear to be a reliable ruler, as the people regard her as dignified, righteous, and reliable. She is also a devout follower of Akatosh and frequently goes to the Chapel of Stendarr to pray, and her grief is likely a big reason why she is so devout. While she is a polite and capable ruler, her grief can make her a bit absent at times. For example, when an Oblivion gate opens outside of Coral, the people will say they feel she cares more about finding the missing portrait of her husband than defending the fucking city, which is not a good look for her. Speaking of a missing portrait, that portrait of Arriana's husband was actually stolen, and we the player can uncover who the culprit is, though I'll let you uncover the culprit for yourself. Arriana's grief may make her a bit absent-minded at times, but she does appear to be a very decent ruler that does what she can for her city. And since she was never meant to be a countess in the first place, only inheriting the position, I feel she deserves bonus points. Excavating her way into 2nd place is Narina Carvain. Countess Narina Carvain is the ruler of the city Bruma. Not only is she the ruler of the city, but she is also a collector of Akaviri artifacts, and will even send the player to recover one called the Draconian Madstone. Narina is a scholar with a passion for history and also seems to have an analytical mind, with people saying that she is tough and cold but always honest. She also seems to do a good job at trying to weave the Nibelungian and Nordic cultures together. Narina even appoints a Nord named Bird as captain of the guard to make sure the other Imperial guards respect Nordic culture. Countess Narina Carvain is also the only count that is super involved in the main quest, even being the only one to recognize Martin Septim as the true Emperor of Cyrodiil. In the main quest, we see that Narina is a careful person and states that while she is ready to send a militia to hold off a Daedric incursion from the Great Gate, she urges the player to recruit more allies from the various other counts, and will only be totally confident once all the cities provide their aid. Countess Narina Carvain is a tough but fair ruler with a mind for history and is also loyal to the Blades and the Empire. I feel that she did quite well when helping the Blades and player hold off against Mehrunes Dagon and the rest of the Daedra, and I feel she deserves second place for that alone. Before naming the greatest count in Oblivion, I want to give an honorable mention to Corvus Umbranox, who was the Count of Anvil before her wife took over. I already talked about how Corvus was the Grey Fox and how his name was stricken from existence. However, because he was a thief that cared more about robbing than ruling, I would say that he is a poor count and that his wife was a much better ruler. The common citizens even express the same viewpoint and believe Anvil is far better off with Millona than with Corvus. I'm only ranking the current counts, and Corvus doesn't really act like a count after being reinstated, which is why he just gets an honorable mention. But if I had to rank Corvus, I would probably place him between 4th and 5th place, behind Arriana but in front of Marius. And now it is time for me to name the greatest count that we can meet in the game of Oblivion. You probably know who I was going to mention from the beginning of this video, especially since he has the most interesting lore out of all the other counts. Ladies and gentlemen, Janus Hassildor! Count Janus Hassildor is the ruler of the city Skingrad, but he is very reclusive and is almost never seen in public. He is also known to be a very powerful wizard, which is why Skingrad is the only city without a court wizard. Janus Hassildor is one of the best counts, mostly because of his policies that he enforces, as crime and public drunkenness are almost completely unknown. Yet the people still love and respect him, showing his policies are not too forceful, and respects the lives of his people. It also helps that Skingrad is one of the greatest and most prosperous cities in all of Cyrodiil, even giving the Imperial city itself a run for its money. While Janus is a respected ruler, he does harbor a dark secret. If you somehow meet him and look into his eyes, you will know the truth. Janus Hassildor is secretly a vampire. Now, while Janus is a vampire, he is quite different from the rest of his kind, as he dislikes other vampires because of how primal their urges are, and also how murderous they are. He also hates when vampires try to move into his city because not only does it spell danger for his people, but it also invites vampire hunters. And it should be fucking obvious why Janus dislikes vampire hunters. Now, you might be wondering how Janus feeds, since he is a vampire. Well, we will never know for sure, but the butler of Castle Skingrad, Shumgro Yarug, references that he purchases blood from people, indicating that Janus only drinks blood from willing participants and pays them appropriately for it. If you think about it, he's kinda like the ultimate vegan. Janus was also instrumental in passing along information that led to the destruction of the greatest necromancer of all time, Mannimarco, the King of Worms, and his necromantic worm cult. The fact that Janus knew about the coming of Mannimarco before anyone at the fucking Mages Guild shows that he is very wise and very resourceful. His information also saved the Mages Guild, even though Janus isn't a big fan of them. Now, Janus was infected with vampirism more than 50 years ago, but because he is seen as a powerful sorcerer, nobody will really question his age since wizards have the potential to live a very long time. I mean, Abner Tharn, who was an imperial sorcerer and not a vampire, lived to around 164 years old, and don't forget the Telvanni wizard lords who lived for thousands of years. However, Janus was not the only one infected with vampirism, as he also had a wife named Rona Hasseldor who was also infected. Now, Janus took to his vampirism rather well, but his wife was disgusted and ashamed at what she became, and so she refused to feed and drink blood, which made her fall into a very deep coma. If the player becomes a vampire and wishes to seek a cure, they can contact Janus, who is also seeking a cure for his wife, so that she may return to human and pass away normally and peacefully. Janus will direct the player to a Glenmoral witch named Melisandre, who will then ask for a bunch of ingredients. Afterwards, Melisandre will cure both the player and Rona, who will eventually pass away after Janus has a beautiful moment with her. Simply put, Janus is not only the most in-depth count bursting with intrigue and lore, but he is also the greatest and most powerful count out of all the others. And honestly, it's not even close. And that's all I wrote, a video where I rank every single count in Oblivion Remastered. While the candidate for first place was pretty clear, I did have a fun time learning and writing about the other counts, and hope you have learned something in this video as well. If this video does well, I will probably make a few more ranked videos discussing other topics like the cities and guilds of Oblivion Remastered. But before the video ends, I would like to give a shout out to my channel members who I count on to keep me motivated. And they are Mirak, Sovdark, Connor Runda, Will Ernst, The Proud Prince, Skooma Addict, JJ Ensid, Grud, Luis Eduardo, Dova 2023, Josh McDonald, Milani Stilla, Abdullah the Goat, Luxie, Batman Man, David Correa, Ranger McKay, Dalton Rupert, I Love House Halalu, Kirill Gaming, Carson Friday, Felxus Rianis, Cosmo, Sebastian Caponero, Vito Simone Taglianetti, and Joseph Anderson. So with all that being said, make sure to like the like button, like the subscribe button, and like the bell notification down below to be updated on future videos. And I will see you whenever the fuck I decide to upload again. House Telvanni be with you.
I suppose you want to be asked nicely. Very well. Please, O hero of Skyrim, I shall be ever so grateful.